Hello, glad you're here. I'm Lisa Ram, host of Political Breakfast and Morning Edition on WABE in Atlanta. Welcome to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. This is the debate among Democratic candidates for Congressional District 7. Let's meet the candidates for this debate. They are in alphabetical order. Carolyn Bourdeaux is the current representative of District 7. Lucy McBath is the U.S. House Representative from District 6. And Donna McLeod is a Georgia State Representative from District 105. Now let's meet our panelists for the day. Tia Mitchell is a Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Kurt Yeomans is a reporter covering government for the Gwinnett Daily Post. Welcome all of you. For complete rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website, atlantapressclub.org. To start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question by one of the panelists. Candidates have 60 seconds to answer each question. Tia Mitchell, you get the first question to Donna McLeod.
Representative McLeod, part of your pitch is that you're the only Democratic candidate in the race who currently lives within the 7th Congressional District's boundaries. Can you answer why should your address trump Representative McBath and Representative Bourdeaux's experience representing Metro Atlanta in Washington?
Thank you, Tia. Of course, I'm a state representative as well, so I have legislative experience as well. But I've been living in the district for 22 years. And in those 22 years, most people did not even want to recognize Gwinnett County as a possible Democratic county. I've registered over 30,000 people in the district. When it came time to get extended early voting, I was at the table pushing for that. I got souls to the polls Sundays voting. I've been doing the work in the district. I'm not just saying this because of these ladies. I'm doing this because I want to represent the district that I've lived in for 22 years, because I know the district and the district knows me, and I've been doing the work, period.
Thank you. Kurt Yeomans, it is your turn to ask a question to Carolyn Bourdeaux.
Representative Bourdeaux, you've faced some criticism from Democrats in the area that maybe you haven't been progressive enough during your time in Washington so far. How do you respond to people who say you've been too centrist and not supportive enough of the Biden agenda? And also, if you were re-elected, what's one piece of the most progressive legislation you would push?
Well, there's a lot in that question, but let me just start out with what I do is I ground everything in the needs of the people of this district. And we have a lot of them. So one of my top priorities is trying to expand Medicaid in Georgia. And I've introduced legislation with Senator Warnock on the Senate side to do that. That's 30,000 people who would get health insurance in the 7th District if we did that. We also need infrastructure, and we need transit, we need wastewater. The infrastructure bill was very, very important to our community because congestion is the #1 barrier to economic development. It is also very important for jobs, for social justice, and lays the foundation for climate change. I would say the most progressive piece of legislation that I signed on to actually early last year and would continue to work on is legislation to study reparations, and that's H.R. 40.
Ms. Bourdeaux, thank you. Tia, you get the final question in this round for Lucy McBath.
Representative McBath, I wanted to ask you, you are the incumbent, but the current District 7, sorry for the, I'm a little bit distracted, but current District 7 only includes a swatch of what was your previous district. How do you respond to concerns that we're hearing from voters in District 7 that you're more concerned with your personal history and your personal story and not focused enough on this district you would like to represent? How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, thank you so much, Tia, for that question. And I have to say that when my son was murdered, I made a promise to him, gun violence survivors and victims like myself, and also people like me that have pre-existing conditions, that whatever I could do in Washington, I would do to make sure that I kept them safe from unnecessary gun violence, making sure that people like me have access to affordable health care, lowering the cost of your prescription drugs, making sure that we're caring for our veterans, and making sure that our children have the best education that they can get. And, you know, I have to honestly say I'm really proud to be the front runner in this race because people know me. They know the work that I've done. They know I have worked diligently on their behalf in Washington. And I'm running in this race because I simply believe that we should not allow Governor Kemp, the Republican Party, or the NRA gun lobby to dictate who represents our communities in Washington. That is you, the Georgia residents. You should be making those determinations. So I'm continuing to make sure that I'm representing your interests in Washington as I always have.
Representative McBath, thank you. That concludes the first round of the debate. The candidates will now ask a question to an opponent of their choice. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and the candidate who asks the question will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, Lucy McBath, you may ask the first question.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask this question of Representative Bourdeaux. Can you tell us, you've never really said which of President Obama's opponents that you voted for in the 2012 Republican primary. Are you willing to tell us that now?
Oh, well, that's an old story. That was in the primary, and Obama didn't have an opponent in the primary. John Lewis was the other person on the ballot where I was voting. And so that was just an effort to beat back the crazy on the Republican side. So I did at that time. There was no race on the Democratic side, but it was, there was one on the Republican side. I have to say, many people in the 7th District, before I flipped it, would do that kind of strategic voting. And one of the things I've been able to do is really bring people into the fold in the 7th District. In the primary in 2020, 85,000 people voted. 50% had never voted in a Democratic primary before. And when I pushed it over the line, I was the only Democrat in the country to flip a seat. That is because I reach out to all people across party lines and bring together a coalition that was essential for flipping the 7th District and for flipping Georgia.
Representative, you have time for a rebuttal.
Thank you so very much. President Obama wasn't the only Democrat that you didn't support. In 2012, John Lewis faced a primary opponent, and instead of voting for John Lewis, you chose to vote in a Republican primary. At a time when voting rights are under attack, we cannot afford to waver. For women in particular, communities of color, these are issues that are literally a matter of life or death. And I know this because I have lived it. I promise that I will never sacrifice our values because the stakes are simply too high.
Thank you, both of you. Now, Donna McLeod, you get the next question of your opponent of choice.
Yes, thank you. This is for Representative McBath. You declared that you do not live in the 7th Congressional District, and your mailers and your commercial clearly doesn't say that where you're running. So it seems to me you're deceiving the people in the 7th Congressional District. Can you please let them know if you're playing musical chairs with them, and whenever the music stops, that's where you're going to sit down, and so any seat will do for you?
I have lived in the Atlanta metropolitan suburbs for over 30 years. My son, Jordan, he was born here, he was raised here, he went to school here, and he's actually buried here. And people know me. They know my story. They know how hard I have worked on their behalf in Washington. And in fact, I'm very proud to be the front runner in this election because people know me. They know that they can trust me. I have dedicated my life since my son was murdered every single day, waking up to make sure that I understand those policies and support those policies, the policies of President Biden, to make sure that you have exactly what you need to be successful, because I understand that voting for those policies sometimes is a matter of life or death for you, my Georgia family.
Can I have a rebuttal?
Yes, you can.
Absolutely, we can empathize with you for Jordan's death. But the 7th Congressional District is the most diverse district in the state of Georgia and deserves a voice that actually understands it. We gave one congresswoman an ability to do so, and she failed. And I don't see why we should give another one who doesn't live in the district and understands what we go through in the 7th Congressional District. It is so important for anyone who's running for office that they live in the district that they're going to be serving. We have to be about our republic and representative democracy. It can't be that you can sit in any seat, anytime, anywhere. It is important for us to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Carolyn Bourdeaux, you get the final question this round of an opponent.
Congresswoman McBath, in the 6th District, the front runner, a Republican, is Rich McCormick. He's the one I beat in 2020. He's a guy who probably has a perfect score with the NRA and doesn't think women should have an abortion even if they are going to die in childbirth. How can you say you're fighting for choice or gun safety reform when you're handing your seat in Congress to Republicans like him?
Well, as I said before, I'm very proud to be the front runner in this race because people do know me. They know that I've fought on their behalf in Washington from the very beginning. They know I've done everything in my power to make sure that I've been standing on the front lines for my good friend John Lewis's Voting Rights Act. I have reduced the cost of prescription drugs by a bill that I have just passed in the House, lowering the cost for insulin for those chronic sufferers of diabetes. I have protected your communities and your families by passing federal background checks for all gun sales in Congress. I have passed legislation to make sure that our children are not defrauded by for-profit institutions when they're in school. And when the Gwinnett County schools needed help the most, I was able to attribute CARES Act funding, millions of dollars to make sure that our teachers were paid, to make sure that our students had access to school lunches and summer school programs. I have done the work. I have been in our community. I'm meeting people where they are, whether it is in their schools or their businesses. People know that they can depend on me because I have delivered for them.
Okay, I get to rebut?
Yes, you do.
All right. Let's just be clear. Some of those bills you're talking about, like background checks and other gun safety reform, lowering the price of insulin, those haven't passed. They passed the House, but not the Senate. What you are doing by leaving your seat and coming over into the 7th is handing the Republicans a seat, handing the NRA a seat, and allowing Kevin McCarthy to be one step closer to becoming Speaker. Everything that we have been fighting for, you are undermining by leaving and coming and fighting me here.
Thank you all for your remarks. That concludes our second round. For those just joining us, this is the debate between Democratic candidates for Congressional District 7. We will now go back to the panel to ask questions to the candidate of their choice until we run out of time. As a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions of the candidates. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. Kurt Yeomans, you get the first question in this round.
So this question is going to be for all three of our candidates. Pre-clearance was, of course, taken away in 2012, and we just went through the first redistricting without that. If you guys are elected, would you reinstate pre-clearance, and how would you do it, whether it be through a constitutional amendment or through a bill? And if you do want to put it in a bill, how would you protect it from a court challenge that might take it away again? And we will start, I'm just going to make it simple and go from left to right on this one. I'll start with Representative Bourdeaux, and then Representative McBath, and then Representative McLeod.
Right. So, dear Lord, I support preclearance, and I am a strong and devout supporter of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which the main point of that is to reinstate preclearance. I have fought for voting rights over and over and over again. I am endorsed by Ambassador Andrew Young, a civil rights leader who was previously endorsed by John Lewis, and care deeply about these issues. In 2018, I came within 433 votes of flipping this seat. The major problem was that 1/3 of the absentee ballots that were thrown out in the state of Georgia came out of Gwinnett. I litigated around that issue, and I won. And that set the stage for the victories that the Democrats had in 2020. In 2020, when I ran my campaign, I was the only campaign in the country to have an entire arm devoted to protecting the vote. I care deeply about that. I strongly support H.R. 1, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and many other pieces of legislation that have been critical and will be critical going forward to protecting voting rights.
As a young child in the stroller, my father pushed me in the stroller at the March on Washington. So fighting for civil and human rights and protecting access to the ballot box for every individual in this country is in my DNA. That is the reason why the very first piece of legislation that I passed in the House was to make sure that we were protecting our voting rights. I passed a piece of legislation that would make sure that our election officials were not allowed to run in federal elections that they were overseeing. I have been on the front lines of passing my good friend John Lewis's Voting Rights Act since the very beginning. I am the only candidate in this race that has been strongly endorsed by In Citizens United, an organization that's doing great work to make sure that we're keeping corporate interests out of our politics and let America vote. I have been there, I have fought, and I will continue to do so because that is the legacy of my family, and I will always make sure that your vote is completely unfettered and you have the ability to vote your conscience and your will at the ballot box.
Representative McLeod?
Just a correction, the pre-clearance actually ended in 2013. Unlike Representative Bourdeaux, who was asked in October of 2017 what was going on in the state of Georgia, which I was a legislator, and we were the one that passed SB 2021, the most egregious voter suppression legislation. She said that she felt that this should be left to African Americans to basically fight for voting rights. She didn't feel that was.
I want to rebut that.
It was a quote inside, and I could read the quote, but I don't think I have enough time. At the end of the day, you didn't feel that it was necessary for you to fight for voting rights, even though you're an elected official and it's your responsibility to lead. I've been registering people to vote. I've registered over 30,000 people. Not one of these representatives have ever been on the ground. I stood at Walmarts from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. registering people to vote. That's what you talk about. When you talk about caring about voting rights, I wasn't born here. I was born in Jamaica, and I came here, and I'm an elected official. In less than 6 years, I was an elected official. That's how you do it. You stand up for voting rights by being a part of it, showing people that you want to lead on voting rights.
This warrants response from both of your opponents. 30 seconds apiece. Carolyn, Bourdeaux, we'll begin with you.
So first of all, you've completely misconstrued my comment there. My comment was that I am supposed to uplift people of color who are leading the charge. This is why Terry Sewell from Alabama was the person who introduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I was very, very impatient. I had my staff call her almost every single week last year to see when she was going to be introducing that bill because I cared about it so much. But I wouldn't step in front of her and introduce that bill. It is for me to be a part of that team. But I care very deeply about voting rights, and I have fought it in election after election to make sure that we protect everyone's right to vote in this state.
Representative McBath, would you like to respond?
You know, I think we've seen of recent the horrific attacks that have been ensued on our ability to be able to exercise our right to vote. And I think that's the reason why we know that the Republican Party has really worked overtime to make sure that they are circumventing and suppressing communities of color. That's why it's so important that we make sure that we do everything that we can to make sure that we are fighting for fair maps in our courts, fighting to make sure that everyone has access to the ballot box. And for any individual in this country, our elected officials that are not willing to stand on the front line and are desecrating our democratic process, we need to be voting in massive numbers in these midterm elections to make sure that they are voted out of office. My community, you can always count on me to make sure I'm
you're
making
out of time there. I apologize. Your 30 seconds is up there. We're going to head back to our panelist, Tia Mitchell.
Can I state a quote that she actually said?
Tia Mitchell will continue with your questioning.
All three of you candidates currently hold elected office. Can each of you, and we'll start with Representative McLeod, talk about a bill that you're most proud of? What did it do, and how were you able to work the process to get it across the finish line if it made it that far?
The bill that I'm most proud of did not make it across the finish line, but for those who were not those who don't understand, the formula for funding public schools, the last time it was updated was 1985. And I've been pushing to make sure that that formula gets updated because there's so many parts of our school system that is left out, and public education keeps being raided on and taking things away from our students. And in the Georgia budget, there's $140 million in the budget for private prisons. So we're always preparing our kids to go to prison. It's got to stop. And I introduced this piece of legislation. It got a lot of traction, got a lot of support from educators, as well as some of the unions that support teachers. It is so very important that we update this formula. It didn't make it past the finish line, but it is worth for anyone that is elected in the state of Georgia to keep pushing that. And that's why we needed Build Back Better, so we could get stuff like universal pre-K, in which Representative Bourdeaux sabotaged.
Representative Bourdeaux, will you please respond with a rebuttal?
Sure. I did not sabotage that. And in fact, just last week, I delivered $770,000 to every single elementary school in Gwinnett to have an early childhood education program. And that, to me, is a down payment on the universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, which we so desperately need. I have been a ferocious advocate for that, getting it into Build Back Better, which passed the House, and I voted for it. It is stuck in the Senate, and this is the problem that Democrats have right now, is that we need to have more people in the Senate to be able to get that through. So I care deeply about early childhood education, and indeed, I have delivered repeatedly for my community on that front.
Representative McBath, would you like to respond to Tia's question?
Thank you very much for that question. I think, I have passed many bills in the House. Yes, some of those bills have not actually been able to pass the Senate yet, but I actually have passed 6 laws for the country in 3 short years. But I remember what my father used to say all the time when we were on the front lines with him marching for the civil and human rights of all Americans, is that progress is slow. Things do not change overnight, and we're talking about cultural shifts and changes that we're making here, trying to pass policy to do that very thing. And just because it's hard and just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we give up and doesn't mean that we stop trying. Cultural shifts and change take sometimes years and progress, but I want my community to know that I will never give up. I will always stand on the front lines to protect you, your right to vote, your health, and to keep you safe from unnecessary gun violence.
Thank you all. We have about 4 minutes left in the show, so we'd like to get to your final statements. That's all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Carolyn Bourdeaux, we'll begin with you.
Here's what is going on in the 7th District. Lucy has made a calculated choice that it is easier to come to fight me in the 7th than to fight Republicans in her own district. By doing this, she has given up her seat, and she's helping Republicans take over the U.S. House in November. As the Congresswoman from Georgia's 7th District, I show up, I listen, and I deliver for you. I have held over 200 community events and 17 town halls. I recently delivered $5 million in special projects to improve affordable housing, to invest in early childhood education. With Senator Warnock, I am leading the charge in Congress to expand Medicaid. I am endorsed by over 50 major community leaders, including Ambassador Andrew Young. And I can assure you that if the shoe had been on the other foot in redistricting, I would not abandon you. And I have proven this over and over again in tough race after tough race. I am deeply vested in this community. I care about you, and I ask for your vote in the primary on May 24th.
Closing statements from Lucy McBath.
I want my Georgia family to know that I have worked as hard as I possibly can to be invested in you, to make sure that you have everything that democracy says that you should be afforded. But really, at the end of the day, I'm just a mom on a mission. That's the way I think about my work. As a mom, I want to keep you safe. I want to keep you healthy. I want to make sure our children are educated. I want to care for our veterans. I want to make sure that you have access to affordable housing, clean drinking water, clean air to breathe. I want to make sure that we're caring for our veterans and for our seniors. That is what I think about every single day. I'm just a mom on a mission, and I thank you because the most important endorsement I could ever receive would be from you, my family, my Georgia constituents, and allowing me the opportunity to continue to do the good work that we've done in Washington on your behalf.
Donna McLeod, we have 2 minutes left. You've got a minute of it.
Thank you. Thank you to the Atlanta Press Club for the series. I am State Representative Donna McLeod. I was born in the beautiful island of Jamaica and grew up in Ontario, Canada. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm an engineer, a chemical engineer, I'm a small business owner, and now I am candidate for Congressional District 7. I know the 7th, and the 7th knows me. For the past 22 years, I've been doing the work. I've registered over 30,000 people. I've done ensure that extended voting was a part of our community. I've also made sure that Souls to the Polls was a part of our community. None of my opponents on this stage can vote for themselves. They do not live in the 7th Congressional District. We can't afford for people to pay musical chairs with our republic and representative democracy. When the music stops, you don't just go looking for another seat. The people in the most diverse district in the state of Georgia deserves representation that gives them a return on investment. That is why I humbly ask you for your vote. Early voting starts tomorrow, so please go to my website at donnamcleod.com for more information, and thank you so much.
Representatives McLeod, McBath, and Bourdeaux, thank you so much. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, May 24th, and early voting begins on May 2nd. Our thanks to all the candidates. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Lisa Ram. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Louder Milk Young Debate Series. Have a great evening.